Okay, and it's a pleasure to welcome onto the show today Mr. Paul Draper. Hi, Paul.
Hi, mate. How you doing?
I'm fine. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So we just caught up with you today after a busy session of promoting the new album and also the tour, which is going to be kicking off again, isn't it, next year?
Yeah, bit of all that. Yeah, just travelling around the northwest, a bit of Chester, a bit of Liverpool today. So
it's been a bit of a long time in the making, really, hasn't it? Getting the solo album out. When we think about it, going back now 20 years since the first Manson album was released. I was thinking to myself when I was coming in here today, I was wondering if whether or not, because obviously it's many years down the line, there was any thoughts of bringing back the sort of rock star haircut, because I noticed it's a bit short now. The old look that you had on Wide Open Space.
No, I think I'm lucky to just have this amount of hair left, so I'm not going to risk it by getting the sun in back out again.
Because that was one thing though with Manson. I remember there was a lot of change in looks, wasn't there, throughout the course of the band, and I was reading somewhere that there was a big David Bowie influence with you early on, and that's what you were sort of going for with the changing of the styles.
Sure, yeah. I mean, when we started out, I don't think we had any image other than what we'd wear hanging out, And I think it was a photographer at the Melody Maker, a guy called Tom Sheehan. And I remember we'd done an early shoot, and we were just, a band standing against a brick wall.
Yeah.
And I'd said to him, I don't think this represents musically what we're doing. And he just said, let's get creative with the photo shoots, and that's what it started with the Melody Maker. So we did. And I think the first one we did was me in a road, and I put loads of sign in my hair, and it was like a Johnny Rotten thing.
Yeah,
I looked like Johnny Rotten, and they really liked that, and they give us a full page in the Melody Maker, So when we said, okay, so we're into this thing now, and he said, let's get really creative with the photo shoot, So then next thing, we were going to Japan on our first tour, and we just literally bought a load of boiler suits and just looked like this mad space rock band, and stood in the middle of Shibuya in Tokyo, and that got us on the cover.
Yeah.
And we just kept running with it really until we ran out of ideas, and then we just went back to being a bit boring again. But yeah, it was really me and Tom, the photographer from the Melody Maker, wanting to just do something to get us in the magazine, really, and we went with it, and it seemed to work. Yeah. So
talking of, you mentioned David Bowie. Was he an influence? Who were the main influences growing up? I know, and I want to move on to it in a few moments' time, because you very luckily interviewed Paul McCartney. I remember reading a few years ago. But was it Bowie, or was it mainly the Beatles and McCartney?
Well, before coming into a band, my main influences were certainly the Beatles in terms of songwriting. Obviously we did like a little parody of the Beatles in Tax Loss and stuff like that, off the first Manson album. But my greatest hero musically, or influence, if you like, was Prince. Although I don't think we sound like Prince or anything like that. But I loved Prince, and I thought of Manson as being some sort of the first album was some sort of coming together of Prince and the Beatles, which would be the greatest musical act ever existed.
The funky Beatles.
Exactly, yeah. And I always say when I was a kid I want to be as big as the Beatles, but we actually never even got as big as the Ruttles. But I think the David Bowie influence on Manson came when the publishers came in with a load of CDs and plonked them down and said, everyone will say to you, to be an artist you have to open your mind and think from the ether and all that. And they just said, that's a load of rubbish, you got to do what David Bowie does and change with the times. And of course he started off as glam rock and ended up as drum and bass, you know what I mean? And so we thought, okay, so if David Bowie's jumping in, why don't we be influenced by David Bowie? So David Bowie became a way of fighting back artistically at the shallowness of the music industry, I think.
Did you ever get a chance to meet David Bowie at all? Because around about that time you spent in the drum and bass stuff. I think the late 90s when Manson were on the scene, it was the Outside album, wasn't it, for Bowie?
Well, we toured, we supported him on his tour.
Did you? Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, in Italy, we supported him on the Italian leg of his European tour.
What was that like?
Amazing, yeah. He's a really good guy, and he liked our album, so he just invited us to come and play with him. And Reeves Gabriel was his guitarist at the time, and he really liked the album as well. And he came into our dressing room, before the gig, and have a ciggy with him and chat about ticket sales and Ziggy Stardust and what you're opening with tonight, Dave. And he go, I'm just going to do Bewley Brothers, acoustic, and I've got to go now. And he just walk on. It's 50,000 people in the Bay of Naples, so amazing memories of David Bowie. And he was a top guy, just like a normal geezer who just just went with it. Just clung on for dear life until everyone recognised him as probably the greatest male artist the country's ever produced, really.
And I know when you look at it, as you're saying about with the changing and stuff, right towards the end, with no one would have thought the jazz, he would make sort of jazz cool the way he did.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think his last two albums were absolutely brilliant. And, the Next Day I thought was brilliant. Listened to that loads, and then Black Star was just off the clock. I mean, I think he had like a little cafe round. I mean, that was Bowie, wasn't it? He'd take different things and put them together and create something new out of it. So it was like a very, very modern production-wise, but it's like some sort of crazed, updated dance jazz thing with a big Gregorian chant in the middle. And he'd mix all these elements up, and that's what David Bowie was. That's what he was.
Creative writer.
That's what art is.
I mentioned then as well about and I was reading through some of it last night. How did the interview win you? Because you'd sort of disappear from the scene. It was in the background. You're working on songwriting and producing other artists, and then the first time I saw your name again was when you interviewed Paul McCartney. And was it for the reissue of the Ram album?
Yeah, it was. It was a website it was for, and they did a series called Artist on Artist,
right? Where
they'd get someone a musician to interview another musician, and they thought because I was called Paul and born in Liverpool,
Paul versus Paul.
Yeah, it was Paul. The two Pauls, the two songwriting Pauls from Liverpool. Obviously, he's the senior one. I'm not going to. But, so I went and I talked to him about songwriting. And that was it. We did an interview about his songwriting and how he got to the position of writing Ram, which is a really, really underrated album. I mean, it's just sort of throwaway in its day. It's only when you listen back now and you think like, it was some brilliant songs on it. And it was his biggest ever album in Russia because all the Beatle albums were banned. So that was the first thing that was available. I
think that's the thing though with McCartney, because you do when you revisit a lot of his albums, and he's going through a period of reissuing them all at the moment, isn't he? His back catalogue, and I think because the main focus was on the likes of George with All Things Must Pass, and then he released really creative albums, and obviously John Lennon. So Paul became the poppy one, really, didn't he?
Yeah, I think Ram's
didn't get the credit that he deserved.
Sure, I think Ram's a genuinely brilliant album, and obviously went on, he did his Wings stuff and all like that. It was only years later he came back and did McCartney too, but I think really underrated, and probably he's doing the right thing reissuing them. And I mean, by the time he reissued that, what was it, 1970, 71 or whatever like that? Led Zeppelin were out, and it was the birth of glam rock, and it's probably overlooked. Many things are in musical history. So I think he was very keen to put that across. He's also keen to stress Linda McCartney's contribution to it, which was basically if she wasn't there, it wouldn't have been made. So it was as simple as that. She was like his, he just gave him a life to be able to do it. And he got quite deep with him. He said he'd gone through quite a dark time and drank a bit, and got his stuff together and made the album.
The Beatles,
and like Linda really helped him and put that record. And that was, he did the McCartney album, but then he went to New York and did this properly in a studio, and he described how he did it and his songwriting process as well, and how he'd, because there's things on there like bits like Uncle Albert, and you can hear like he's going a little bit prog rock in it, and it's like, how'd you start off doing Love Me Do, and then 7 years later you're like Emerson, Lake and Palmer,
the genius of Paul McCartney. I suppose.
And he says like, I heard this record, and he actually says in my interview, if you look it up, you just key in my name and Paul McCartney's name, you'll find this interview, and he talks about this song which influenced him and Pete Townsend, and that's how Townsend then started doing key changes and timing changes, and just little influences that they find and move it on a little bit. It
still stands to this day. So it still stands
that's the key thing. Is the finished product good, and does it stand the test of time?
I think that's the thing with. I was going to ask you with regards to the stuff with Manson. It's 20 years on now. Did you ever think back then that 20 years on you'd still be in the music business and people? Because you don't have like fan fests and stuff. The Manson fans. It's still very much it's a big deal to them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the last one they did was at Parr Street in Liverpool. Was where we recorded the first album.
It must be brilliant though to have it, because a lot of bands, if you look back, because there was almost overcrowded the music business, wasn't it, in the 1990s, with so many great acts, and a lot of them have just disappeared. So for a band that haven't released anything since 2003 to still be having stuff like that, it must. Really cool, a cool feeling for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't sit here thinking like, oh, how great am I? I mean, the split of Manson was, pretty, it wasn't a great band split, but I think it ended so quickly that the fans sort of took over the ownership of the band, if you like, and I just feel it was something I did with my life years ago, and it's not mine anymore.
Yeah,
it's just the people who do the conventions, and there's a tribute band, and they're really good. I mean,
how mad's that though? Seeing someone like pretending to be you.
I went to watch them. They're way better than the reviews said we were. It was like, it's like, but yeah, I mean, what makes me laugh is like the bands, they'll get like 600 people go and watch them. It's like more than like most 90s bands, the real bands still together go and watch them. But I think. I don't know. I think it's because it ended suddenly. I think of it like that Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was just one of them things that people remember.
Sort of frozen in time for them. Really,
and then people sort of celebrate it going forward, and then it becomes the possession of the fans who are interested in it. So all as I can say is that I was negative about the band for a long time, and once they did the convention, and it spread, and now they're doing another one, I'm just positive about it. But I don't view it as my thing. I'm just happy that people.
You're a fan now, just a bystander watching.
I'm a bystander, but a positive bystander. It was a lot of people's favourite bands, a lot of people's favourite band, maybe when they were a teenager or something like that. So it was really like, because I was a massive Prince fan, and like I would have flown to Minneapolis and like knocked on his door if I'd have had the money.
But I mean, sometimes I'll admit I will interview people, and I've got no time for the music at all, really. But with your stuff has stood to the test of the time, and even driving here, Fiona, who's in the corner there, will vouch for this one with me. I had Legacy Blasting, which I absolutely love that tune, and they do still stand up, and it's things like that, even Strip of Vicar and going back to Wide Open Space, they have stood the test of the time. They don't sound AIDS, they don't distinctly sound, oh, that's a 90s tune. It fits in with today's music as it is. Guitar bass, definitely. I think maybe Manson is. I don't think we were a particularly fashionable band. I mean, The Enemy and Melody Maker Reporters and that was because we had hits and built a fan base. I mean, I don't think we were press darlings or anything like that. So I don't think because we weren't particularly in fashion, we never went out of fashion. And I think music now, the first Manson album, we used synthesizers on it and stuff like that. And that is a big part of modern music. Every band's got a synth player, hasn't it? And it's like, I think it's probably it's probably stood the test of time better than a lot of bands. So particularly the first two albums are remembered fondly. People talk about them. So, and they're being reissued over the next years. I don't think sort of being in vogue really with the press though means a lot. I think back to around about that time when you guys were out, there was a band, and I think I might have actually had this discussion with Jackie who looks after you a while ago. Gay Dad, who were like the darlings. Everyone loved Gay Dad. They were everywhere. Gay Dad are going to be the next big thing, and then Gay Dad are probably now working in, I don't know, Topshop somewhere in Brentford, because it just they couldn't sort of reach the highs the music press had built them up to be. They didn't have the songs ready to go with it. I think you guys did.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Gay Dad being in the front of Vox magazine and all this.
I don't love them.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask about Gay Dad. They supported us on tour.
I don't think there's many people, to be honest, I could really ask about Gay Dad these days. Gay who?
They supported us on tour, and I think we were just sidelined in favour of Gay Dad. I don't think anyone really cared about Manson. Gay Dad, it was all about Gay Dad. But unfortunately, I'd get, as you say, not many people really remember Gay Dad.
I was going to say, I can't remember the last time I sat there listening to Oh Jim. Anyway,
you know one of their tracks?
I know all the tracks. Okay. For a brief spell, I was getting it shoved down my throat in 1998.
Yeah, well, they were, yeah, well, that's a long story.
So, the album which you're going to be performing, the debut Manson album, that's going to be performing on your tour next year. But before that was released, I found this out this morning, you had to change the name, change from an O to U in Manson, because the estate of Charles Manson were going to sue you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what we were told. Yeah, I mean, we obviously...
How's that even happen? Like, someone of his notoriety?
Well, it came from our lawyers, who'd obviously knew that there'd been copyright issues with him in the past. So, what we were just a bunch of kids rehearsing in crash rehearsal studios in Liverpool, and suddenly. We said, we're going to get signed by a record company, what we do, and everyone said, get a lawyer. So we called this lawyer, and I think we went down and spoke to him on the phone, and he said, we must tell you. He goes, you might have copyright issues because Charles Manson has copyrighted his name, and he has a big line of clothing stuff. So you did documentaries about him, and that, but you can't put his name on clothes. So
right.
So we took the logo that we'd drawn on a wall in Birkenhead and photographed it and just rubbed the top of the O off. So that's how we got round it.
So of course the album comes out then in 1997. The first time Manson got my attention, where I saw you, I think it was performing Stripper Vicar on TFI Friday.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But back then, I mean, we look at it, it was like 1997. People say, history sort of says that it was 96, and Oasis, Nebworth was where Britpop seemed to die off. I disagree and think it goes into the sort of late 90s. What was it like being in an act, being in a band around the Britpop era? Because it just seemed like the best ever. I know people go on about the 60s and stuff and how great that was, but for me, obviously growing up around that time, the 1990s, it just seemed like we just had so many great bands, the music scene was buzzing. What was it like actually being on the inside of that?
You know, at the time, you know, no one would have known, or we didn't know, that it was going to be a massive cultural explosion that would be remembered 20 years later. You know, it was like every now and again, music transcends music. You know, with the 60s and the 90s was the other example, where clothes and the way people talk. You know, everyone's our kid, or everything's gear and fab or whatever. You know, and it transcends all the culture, and the culture radiates out from the island till you get Cool Britannia in our day and all of that. But it was a bit like that. We would go on the train down to London, and you'd dive in a hotel, jump out, and you'd go to some boat on the River Thames, and you'd just be sitting next to the super furry animals, and the other side would be Jarvis Cocker, and it's just, and then or you'd walk out your hotel in the morning, and like Noel Gallagher would be walking out Supernova Heights the other way, and you'd just see Liam Gallagher walking the other way in a hotel, and you didn't think anything of it. These were just
became the norm.
Yeah, but it's like they're like legendary figures now, and it was. It was a bit of that, and not all the time. You didn't live in that. You go home at night and have your normal, live in your normal house and all that. But you were dipping in and out of that world all the time. And we toured with Suede and the Manic Street Preachers, and it was a massive cultural movement. But I do think '97 marked a massive shift in music away from the poppy side of Britpop. I think Attack of the Grey Lantern R1 came out in the February, and that knocked the Blur album off #1, which caused loads of stink at our record company because we were both on the same label. And then it was only a couple of months after that OK Computer came out, and then that really shifted everything. And then Urban Hymns came out. Yeah. But at the end of the year, the album that got all the accolades was Spiritualized. Ladies and gentlemen, we're floating in space. It was I think that that whole year of music crushed Britpop. Of course, the other big album that was out that year was Be Here Now by Oasis, you know what I mean? And just no one was into it. It was just a joke, But looking back now, there's probably a couple of little tracks on it, But I think that that was the end, should we say, or the start of the post-Britpop era. But that lasted a very short period, because then there was a post Britpop era where everything became, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but like the Embraces, the Travises, the Coldplays, and that era of music that lasted until
the Misery era.
It was until the Strokes came out, and then that changed everything again. But that's what music culture does, doesn't it? And the Strokes were just another rehash of the past, like Britpop was, and they add something new to it, and if it becomes successful, and the wheel just keeps turning. The wheel's turned right round now, so I'm back here. So I don't know how the hell I've done it. But
that's what I was going to say to you, because obviously after that you've got a couple more albums, and then you seem to just disappear, and then last year we reappear with a new album, which is done really, really well. You talk about like technically going the top 20 album chart, so that was great. I mean, we didn't expect that at all, But for me, obviously in my own life, I've never gone away. I never stopped doing music. I just went into writing and producing. I had my own studio in London for like 8 years with loads of different artists, and I started doing interviews again about 3-4 years ago for a project called The Anchoress that I'd done. Was this where there was something with, it was from Mark and Lard, wasn't it? Was it Mark Riley? Is this what sparks it off, really? I was reading.
Yeah, well, I'd been offered interviews loads over the years, and I'd produced this album for an artist called The Anchoress, and we put the first single out on a singles label, Too Pure, in London, and we wanted to make awareness for it. So I said to Catherine, who was the Anchoress, I'll do some interviews for this. So I did one press interview with the Huffington Post, and I did a radio interview with Steve Lamacq, and he debuted the first Anchoress single. And since then, the Anchoress has gone on to be sort of critically acclaimed, and was nominated for the Welsh Music Prize, won the Best Newcomer at the Prog Awards, HMV Welsh Album of the Year. It sold well, and there's a second album in the works on that, and Catherine tours now with the Anchoress with Simple Minds. So that was a real successful project for me. But that was when the fans came to me and said, right, we're going to do a second Manson convention. Yeah. And that's when I just gave them an old track I had that I'd never released, and they played it at the convention. Someone videoed it, put it on YouTube, and NME made it single of the week, and then they put it in the Guardian made it like.
So that's how the action was born then, really.
Yeah. From that moment, that's when record companies started calling me. What are you doing? Then it wasn't a bidding war, but I'd spoke to about 4 or 5 record companies, and then I just picked one and thought, well, there's no going back now,
And it's the fans that have actually influenced your decision to perform the first Manson album in full next year on the tour, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is there's been wranglings over getting hold of the catalogue, so the catalogue now is ready to be reissued, and we literally only found that about 6 weeks ago. So the plan originally was for me, I was going to do, just because I'm a solo artist now, and the last tour I just did all my own solo stuff and just threw a couple of Manson ones in, and I thought I'll separate it out on the next tour, and I initially thought I'll do a full set of my solo stuff, and then half an hour of Manson stuff at the end, and then it was literally only found out in the last 6 weeks that Attack of the Grey Lantern is going to be re-released for its 21st anniversary, or literally 4 days before we go on tour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play my own solo set, take a 20-minute intermission, and then come on and do Attack of the Grey Lantern. So, for its 21st, so it ties in with the reissue.
So I'm guessing then this is going to be the first time a lot of those songs you perform for a couple of decades, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, half of them.
Or even some of them, you wouldn't have even done live with them.
Yeah. I mean, we did Wide Open Space on the tour, so that always gets them going, after a few beers. But I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough task. So we've set ourselves a high bar, to do two sets with an intermission. But as you say, I've haven't been away so long myself. I'm wanting to be a relevant current artist doing my solo stuff. The way I'm going to reach a bigger audience and play bigger gigs. I think the biggest one closest to here is
the Ritz, isn't it, in Manchester, on the 1st of March.
Which is 1,500 people, which was beyond 6 months ago. We wouldn't even believe that we could do that. So this is the way we're going to be able to do it,
So what are your thoughts? So obviously, you've been in the background of the music business. How is it different now to when it was back in the 90s when you first burst onto the scene? Is there any major differences that are standing out for you? Being obviously you're on your own now as opposed to being in a band.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go back to being in a band. That was just a part of my life and stuff. But
so there's definitely no Manson reunion ever going to be happening.
No. I always say it's more likely the Beatles will get back together, but with the original.
I like those odds.
Yeah, it's quite long odds, really. But I think the music industry is a vastly different world to what it used to be. It's probably a lot more professional, a lot more slick in its operation, and it's slimmed down a lot of the the excesses, the Rolls Royces in the swimming pools and all like that have gone, and it's a lot leaner, meaner machine, because the record company don't have the stranglehold on distribution of music anymore, but all of that has meant is there's a sea of music now, so it's how you get recognised above the melee is the new trick, really. It's
like, I think, with media as well, everything is just now, it's anyone can get out there and instantly have a platform with the internet, the way it was on the internet. I was watching it, funny enough, the guy you were on tour at the time, some would say David Bowie was the man who saw all this coming.
Yeah, he did. I mean, David Bowie predicted that music would become like water on a tap, and he said the only thing that will retain its value is live performance, and he was exactly right.
He was absolutely spot on.
He said that like 15 years ago.
So, Paul, you are going to be back out on the road. What I'll do is I'll put a link on the website with this interview as well, where you can check out how you can get tickets to check you out next year on the tour.
Great.
And there's quite a few dates that you're going to be performing at. Obviously, the album Spooky Action is out right now. If you want to download that, or like myself, I still prefer going to a record shop and buying it.
Yeah, that happens a lot, but you got a lot of casual people just streaming stuff and then come the show. So all different ways now. All different avenues and ways to connect with people. That's the big difference. You don't just buy a record
Yeah.
You could be just someone who has Spotify and listens to the whole world of music and just goes.
Well, it's just there, isn't it? In an instant, like say years and years ago, you had to go and queue up and get it.
Yeah,
as a record,
of course, that's why the major record labels are so powerful now, because they have so much muscle on playlists that they can get millions of streams a day, and it all adds up. But for an independent artist like myself, you've got to embrace the future like that. So I'm really positive about it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on this morning, then, Paul, and good luck with the album and everything else in the future and the tour as well next year.
No problem. Thanks for having me.